Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second World Leaders Forum event of 2023, where we are welcoming His Excellency, Archbishop Christophe Pierre, the Apostolic Nuncio to the United States. I am Courtney Smith, Dean of the School of Diplomacy, and I am pleased to have all of you with us, both in person and online. I'd like to send especially warm greetings to our guest, Archbishop Pierre, His Eminence, Cardinal Tobin, Archbishop of Newark, His Excellency, Archbishop Katya, the Apostolic Nuncio to the United Nations, Mr. Kevin Marino, Chair of the University's Board of Regents, Dr. Joseph Nyre, University President, Dr. Katia Passerini, University Provost, other members of the Board of Regents who are present, other members of the Executive Cabinet who are present, also members of the School of Diplomacy Board of Advisors. You're welcome as well. Finally, I'd like to welcome fellow deans, our faculty, the members of the priest community who are here, alumni, and most importantly, our students. Thank you all for joining us. Seton Hall's mission is to empower our students to make a difference in the world. And on behalf of the School of Diplomacy, one way we are doing that is trying to create opportunities for our undergraduate and graduate students to interact with distinguished practitioners who are actually engaged in the field, such as our guest today. Today's event continues a tradition of World Leaders Forums, including former presidents and prime ministers, Nobel Peace Prize laureates, UN Secretary Generals, numerous ambassadors and government officials, and representatives of the Catholic Church and other religious traditions. This reflects our long-standing commitment to, our long-standing connection to the diplomatic and policymaking communities, and our commitment to foster in our graduates a desire to build peace and social justice. Leading us in this mission of servant leadership is Dr. Joseph Nyre, the 21st president of Seton Hall. He frequently speaks about the power of place to change destinations and transform lives, and we are fortunate to have him introduce His Eminence Cardinal Tobin. Dr. Nyre?
On behalf of the Board of Trustees and the Board of Regents, over 100,000 alums, our faculty, our staff, and most importantly, our students, it is certainly my honor to introduce to you Cardinal Tobin. Cardinal Tobin was born in Detroit and grew up the oldest of 13 children. I've met his extended family in the last 18 months. It is quite the bunch. He professed his vows in 1973 and was ordained to the Redemptorists 5 years later. As Superior General of the Order for 12 years, he traveled to missions in more than 70 nations. Pope Benedict appointed him the 6th Archbishop of Indianapolis in 2012. 4 years later, Pope Francis elevated him to the College of Cardinals. And in 2016, he was called to serve Newark as the 6th Archbishop. Cardinal Tobin has been a tireless advocate for the Church and its members. The signature of his ministry is an intense focus on upholding the worth and the dignity of each person. He has invigorated the faithful and led our Catholic community in worship through action. As one of 10 diocesan universities in the entire nation, Cardinal Tobin serves as chair of our Board of Trustees and president of our Board of Regents, and he is the university's greatest friend and ally. Please join me in welcoming Cardinal Joseph W. Tobin.
Thank you very much, President Nyre. And welcome to all. Welcome especially to two members of the Diplomatic Corps of the Holy See, which I don't think I've been in the same room with two nuncios in a while, so this is really special for me, too. I'd ask you to join your hearts and minds with me in prayer as we begin this time together. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this encounter. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion. Allow us to grow closer as a group and nurture among us the bonds of community. Fill us with your grace, Lord God, as we make decisions that will affect ourselves and our world. We ask you to bless the students, staff, faculty, alumni, and friends of Seton Hall University. And continue to remind us that in all we do here today, all that we accomplish is for the pursuit of truth for the greater glory of you and the service of humanity whom you love very much. We ask these things through the intercession of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, Mary, the Mother of the Church, and in the name of Jesus. Amen. Before I give a brief introduction to my colleague and friend, Archbishop Pierre, I'd like to just give a personal witness to the force of the diplomacy of the Holy See. As President Nyre mentioned, I've been able to serve in the church in different countries. And one that is particularly dear to me is the country of my grandparent immigrants, Ireland. My community, the Redemptorists, were very involved for about 30 years in trying to negotiate peace in Belfast, where in West Belfast, our community lies right on the Green Line, which divides the nationalist from the unionist communities. As you know, that was a very tragic situation. Blood was spilt, and there was not one family in the more than 2,000 that came to our church that was untouched by the violence. The Good Friday protocols were signed in our house. And afterwards, Tony Blair, who then was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, said that the negotiations that were so delicate between the nationalists and the unionists, as well as the United Kingdom, would have been impossible without the discreet presence of the Nuncios in London as well as in Dublin. That story's been repeated throughout the history of the diplomatic relations of the Holy See with nation states. And so I'm absolutely delighted to introduce one of its practitioners today. Now, if anyone was born to be a nuncio, it was probably Archbishop Christophe Pierre. He was born in Rennes, a very famous historic city in northwestern France, in Brittany. But he went to grade school in Madagascar. You can imagine the commute. He returned to France for his secondary schooling and then did some of his high school in Marrakesh, Morocco. He attended the major seminary of the Archdiocese of Rennes before doing graduate studies first at the Institut Catholique de Paris and then at the Lateran University in Rome, where he achieved a doctorate in canon law. At the time when he was studying for his doctorate, he was also studying at the Diplomatic School of the Holy See, the Pontifical Ecclesiastical Academy. And he started his service in the Diplomatic Corps of the Holy See on March 5th, 1977. He was ordained in 1970 to the priesthood and was a parochial vicar for a while in the Diocese of Nanterre in northwestern France. After completing his diplomatic studies, he was first appointed to the pontifical representation in New Zealand and the islands of the Pacific Ocean. Subsequently, he served in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, in Cuba, in Brazil, and at the permanent mission of the Holy See to the United Nations in Geneva. He was consecrated an archbishop in 1995 in Saint Malo, France, and appointed apostolic nuncio in Haiti, where he served from 1995 until 1999. Subsequently, he's been the apostolic nuncio to Uganda and then to Mexico, and he was appointed the apostolic nuncio to the United States of America by His Holiness Pope Francis on April 12th, 2016. Archbishop Pierre speaks fluently French, English, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. What is expected of him by the church? Well, Pope Francis, in speaking to the diplomatic corps of the Holy See, I think in 2019, gave 10 commandments for nuncios. The first ones probably would not be surprising. The nuncio is a man of God. The nuncio is a man of the church. The nuncio is a man of apostolic zeal who bears good news. The nuncio is a man of reconciliation. And the fifth one, which I would like to accentuate today, the nuncio is a man of the Pope. He does not represent himself, but rather Peter's successor. And he acts on behalf of the church and before governments. That is, he concretizes, implements, and symbolizes the Pope's presence among the faithful and in diverse populations. Pope Francis at that time noted approvingly that the nunciature, or the residence of the nuncio in a given country, is often called the house of the Pope. Now, I first heard Archbishop Pierre speak at an assembly of bishops in June of 2016. When I returned to the Archdiocese of Indianapolis at that time, a bishop of Indiana who could not be there said, "What's the new nuncio like?" I shrugged and said, "Pope Francis with a French accent." It's my pleasure to introduce the apostolic representative to the United States, Archbishop Christophe Pierre.
You know, it's quite difficult for a Frenchman to speak Spanish with the Argentinian accent. So I try my best. So thank you. Thank you, Your Eminence. I thank you very warmly, you, the Archbishop of Newark, for your words, word welcome, and this nice introduction. Thank you for your presence here today. I greet and thank Dr. Joseph Nyre, President of Seton Hall, for his kind invitation to offer these remarks today in the context of the World Leaders Forum. You know, the title is grand. I was a bit intimidated, but anyway. I greet members of the administration and of the teaching faculty of the university, and I'm very happy to be here for the first time on your campus. And I welcome above all the students of this educational institution who have come to hear something about this rather interesting topic, the Vatican diplomacy. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to meet you and to have this chance for an exchange which I hope will be beneficial for each of us. When asked to indicate a topic for this afternoon's address, I propose aspect of Vatican diplomacy. But I must begin with a confession. There is, strictly speaking, no such thing as Vatican diplomacy. There is, however, the diplomacy of the Holy See. There is the diplomatic activity of the Holy Father and of his principal collaborators. There is the diplomatic service of the Holy See, of which I am a member as Apostolic Nuncio to the United States. But technically, the term Vatican diplomacy is really only a shorthand, a phrase that renders immediately comprehensible a rather more complicated reality. So, we talk analogously about Vatican diplomacy or a Vatican diplomat, and sometimes even Vatican embassy. In fact, we meant something else. The Holy See and the Apostolic Nuncio. First of all, then, we should clarify precisely what is meant by the Holy See, and also why I am the Apostolic Nuncio. I have observed that what we are really exploring today is the diplomacy of the Holy See. But what is the Holy See? What does it mean? In the strict sense, the Holy See refers to the see, This is an ancient word which means very simple seat, the chair of Peter, that's it. The Holy See refers to the see, in other words, the diocese of Peter, and thus it refers to the Pope as Peter's co-successor in that see. In its broader canonical sense, it encompasses the Pope and the Roman Curia as the central organ of governance of the Catholic Church. However, at the level of international law, the Holy See is the proper name given to the sovereign entity that has an entirely peculiar place in the world of diplomatic relations, since it is a sovereign entity related to a person and not to a territory. The Holy See is synonymous with the Pope, who is thus recognized as the subject of international law. My colleague knows that very well because he sits in the United Nations, and still today, I believe, a number of people do not understand why you sit behind a small target called Holy See and not the Vatican. But anyway, we need to be patient and to explain that to the people. This is the purpose of my intervention today. As I said, it is true that we often use the more readily recognizable phrase Vatican diplomacy. But this is a misnomer as such. Even if one of the finest books on the history and meaning of the Holy See's diplomatic activity bears precisely that title, Vatican Diplomacy, was written by Robert Graham, a good Jesuit, and published in 1959, it remains, to my knowledge, one of the best English language treatments of the Holy See's diplomacy. And how is the Holy See related to or mistaken for the Vatican? Well, the Vatican city-state, that small, sovereign territory on and around the Vatican Hill in Rome, is where the Pope lives and where the Roman Curias operates. That's it. But the Vatican city-state itself does not send or receive ambassadors and does not ordinarily engage in diplomatic activity. It is rather the Holy See that sends and receives ambassadors, that is a member, indeed in some cases a founding member, of many international and multilateral organizations that negotiates agreements and treaties and that acts on the international stage. And the Holy See, as we have seen, is synonymous with a person, you said it, the Pope. We might say that the international activity of the Holy See at the diplomatic and non-diplomatic level is nothing other than the activity of the Pope in these spheres. The Pope is the principal diplomatic actor of the Holy See. A parenthesis, if you have seen the beautiful speech of the Holy Father yesterday, the day he arrives in Kinshasa, the speech of Tshisekedi, the president of the Congo, and the Pope. You have the explanation of Vatican diplomacy. The content of the Pope, the power of these two speeches in the terrible context of this country. I think it's a good example. If you have a moment, please watch it and listen to it on YouTube tonight before going to bed. We might say, then, that the international activity of the Holy See at the diplomatic and non-diplomatic level is nothing other than the activity of the Pope. The Pope is the principal diplomatic actor of the Holy See. This fact has been very clear in recent pontificates. We need only think of the personal action of Pope St. John Paul II, particularly in questions concerning Eastern Europe. You know that. Again, in this present pontificate, we can see the impact of that Pope Francis has on the international stage. For the diplomatic identity of the Holy See is anchored in a person, not in a territory. This is the first of many conceptual peculiarities of what we call Vatican diplomacy. That sovereignty and diplomatic identity can be anchored in a person and not in a particular territory, which is usually what determines sovereignty, a person. You know, there is a document of the Pope Francis who says that our faith is not in an idea or an ideology. We are following of a person. It goes in the same direction. As a sovereign subject of international law, then, the Pope exchanges ambassadors in most countries in the world. Ambassadors are accredited to the Holy See, and the Pope, in his turn, sends his own diplomatic representatives, who are called apostolic nuncios, to most of the world's nations. A nuncius, from the Latin, means one who is sent. And thus, the apostolic nuncio is the stable representative of the Pope, vested with diplomatic status. In those few countries with whom the Holy See does not have full diplomatic relations, and there are very few, the Pope sends an apostolic delegate, as indeed he did to the United States for some 80 years, before diplomatic relations were formally established in 1984. The bilateral aspect. I mentioned that the Pope sends and receives ambassadors. Let's put a little flesh on that statement. It is a result, of course, of the diplomatic relationships maintained between the Holy See and individual states. On January the 9th last, Pope Francis met with the ambassadors accredited to the Holy See. At that time, the Secretariat of State gave an updated picture of the Holy See's diplomatic relations. The Holy See has full diplomatic relations with 183 states, as well as with the Order of Malta and the European Union. In addition, it has fixed, though non-diplomatic relations through an apostolic delegate with several other states. On the part of the Holy See, diplomatic relations are maintained by a network of apostolic nunciatures, which are the Holy See's embassies. And given what we have said about the identity of the Holy See, they are rightly considered as representations of the Pope. In this country, as you know, we often speak about the Papal Nuncio, which nicely underscores the point. The Nuncio has the rank of ambassador and, by an ancient courtesy reaffirmed most recently in the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, can also be the dean de jure of the diplomatic corps. I happened myself as nuncio in Haiti to become the dean the day I arrived. Then I became dean because I was the most ancient ambassador in Mexico. I also became the dean a few years in Uganda, but here I am not the dean. This practice is followed as having the nuncio as dean de jure as in about 40 countries. The Holy See has over 100 physical representations with a resident head of mission, either a nuncio or a chargé d'affaires. Thus, some of the Holy See's missions follow more than one state. I undertake this role to this country. I'm the one. For their part, the states in question accredit an ambassador to the Holy See, either resident in Rome or in another city. 91 states have full-time ambassadors to the Holy See resident in Rome, including the US ambassador to the Holy See, His Excellency Joseph Donnelly. The network of nunciatures and of embassy of the Holy See assures a stable relationship with the vast majority of states in our world today. It allows collaboration on questions of mutual interest. It permits the Holy See to have an official channel of communication with government authorities. It favors initiatives in support of peace and religious freedom. From the ecclesiastical point of view, it affords the Holy See an opportunity to be present to the Church in individual nations. Indeed, in practical terms, this is the daily work of the Apostolic Nuncio. He is the representative of the Holy See to the state, of course, but he is also the Pope's representative to the local church, reinforcing the bonds of communion between the See of Peter and the dioceses of the world. You know, in the United States, we have 196 dioceses. So Newark is only one. And the Nuncio is dealing with the 196 in quite a vast territory. Imagine. I greet the Bishop of Patterson just like, because he's one of another diocese, So the Holy See is a very large network of nunciature, then is a significant commitment to dialogue, to communion, to partnership at the bilateral level. It is truly global, with nunciatures in every continent, in virtually every corner of the world. It means, too, that the Holy See is a genuine interlocutor with most of the world's governments and peoples. The multilateral aspect, maybe I should ask my colleague to talk because he's the actor today. The second aspect of the Holy See's diplomatic engagement I want to touch upon is the multilateral sphere. The devastating wake of the Second World War gave birth to several instruments of international cooperation, which have grown enormously in range and complexity and now constitute a central aspect of the global landscape. The Holy See has been deeply engaged with these organizations from the beginning. Since the Holy See's mission is itself global in essence, it is entirely natural that the voice of the Pope should also be heard in this international fora. The Holy See currently has 8 permanent representations exclusively dedicated to multilateral relations. These include, of course, a permanent representative to the United Nations in New York and in Geneva. I happened myself to work a few years ago, 4 years in Geneva. You will recall that Pope Francis addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations a few years ago when he remarked on the importance which the Catholic Church attaches to this institution and the hope which she places in its activities. Indeed, it can be said that Holy See's engagement with the many and varied international institutions is based on this very insight, the importance for a just global order that such instruments of multilateral cooperation represent, and the hope that engagement with them can forward certain of the spiritual aims of the Holy See. That is to say, peace, fraternity, harmony, justice, and other spiritual values. I have put peace at the first of these values, and I shall return to speak of it more in the final part of these remarks. The engagement of the Holy See at the multilateral level is in fact considerable. As I mentioned, the Holy See maintains permanent representatives in the United Nations in New York and in Geneva, but also at the United Nations and other specialized institutions in Vienna, at the World Food Programme and other institutions in Rome, at the United Nations office in Nairobi, as well as those in Paris, including UNESCO. In addition, the Holy See has representatives to the Council of Europe and other European institutions at Strasbourg, as well as to the African Union in Addis Ababa, to name but the most important. And thus, representatives of the Holy See engage with the very wide range of issues that fall under the remit of these multilateral institutions. At Newark, the Holy See's permanent representative regularly intervenes at the ordinary session of the General Assembly and follows the work of many of the commissions and regional groups that are constantly active there. In Geneva, the activity of the Holy See's mission is equally intense, given that many of the agencies of the UN are located there. The Holy See follows, in particular, and contributes to the work of the Global Forum on Migration and Development, the Committee Against Torture, the International Labour Organizations, the World Health Organizations, the UN Programme for Development, and that for the Environment, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNICEF, and so on. In Paris, the work of UNESCO is particularly followed. In Vienna, that of the International Atomic Energy Agency, of which the Holy See is a founding member. Interesting. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and the UN Organization Against Crime and Drugs. In Strasbourg, a representative of the Holy See takes part in the work of the Council of Europe. Closer to home, in Washington, D.C., there is a permanent representative of the Holy See to the Organization of American States. In Asia, an apostolic nuncio is accredited to the Association of the Southeast Asian Nation, ASEAN. And in Nairobi, the work of UN Habitat and of the UN Programme for the Environment are also followed. As I noted earlier, the Holy See invests time and energy in the multilateral sphere in the hope that it will bear fruit in cooperation between nations for the good of the human family. During his address to the General Assembly of the United Nations in 2015, Pope Francis recalled the earlier visits of his predecessor, Pope Paul VI, John Paul II, Benedict XVI. They all went with a similar purpose, that of engagement with the world, that of a call to collaboration in facing challenges, that of extending an invitation to solidarity within the family of nations, and that of building bridges towards peace. Pope Francis made this point during his address in 2015. I quote, "The praiseworthy international juridical framework of the United Nations organizations and of all its activities, like any other human endeavor, can be improved, yet it remained necessary. At the same time, it can be the pledge of a secure and happy future for coming generations. And so it will be, if the representatives of the states can set aside, and this is important, partisan ideological interest and sincerely strive to serve the common good." You know, you recognize the language of the Holy See, and this is a good one. The common good, in fact, is a fundamental principle of the Holy See's bilateral and multilateral engagement. Often, there is a need to invite partners in dialogue from a vision that may be too partial towards solutions that promote the good of all. Pope Francis, in his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, offers a synthesis of this principle, and I quote, "In her dialogue with the state and with society, the Church does not have solutions in every particular issue. Together with the various sectors of the society, she supports those programs which best respond to the dignity of each person and the common good. In doing this, she proposes in a clear way the fundamental values of human life and convictions which can then find expression in political activity. End of quote. Among the fundamental values that the Holy See proposes are religious freedom, of course, respect for international law, and in cases of conflict, humanitarian law. There can be no value more fundamental than religious freedom, which is a freedom not only to worship, but which also implies the liberty of religious communities to organize themselves, to act in the society and in the culture, to form their members and to establish whatever institutions are necessary to give concrete expression to their common life. Both in its bilateral and in its multilateral activity, the Holy See acts not only to promote conditions that allow the Church to live in peace, but to ensure that religious freedom is upheld as a fundamental principle for the benefit of all. In his address to diplomats on January the 9th last, Pope Francis remarked, and I quote, "Religious freedom, which cannot be reduced simply to freedom of worship, is one of the minimum requisites for a dignified way of life. Governments have the duty to protect this right and to assure that each person, in a way compatible with the common good, enjoys the opportunity to act in accordance with his or her conscience, also in the public sphere or in the exercise of their profession." Dialogue and the search of peace. We have looked briefly at the bilateral and multilateral engagement of the Holy See, and I hope you have found interesting the overview of the scale of this involvement. But what about its purpose, its end? Why is the Holy See so engaged? We hinted at this earlier when we spoke about the spiritual values of the Holy See promotes and when we spoke about religious freedom. Of course, the Holy See enters into relations with the states of the world in part to assure the Church's freedom to act and to carry out her mission in each country. The same human subject, after all, is both a member of the Church and a citizen of a particular state. It makes sense that both Church and states act together whenever possible for the good of the same subject. Apart from promoting those conditions that allow the Church to flourish in each land, the Holy See also has a specific set of values and principles that she wishes to offer to the world as a response to the many dilemmas that daily confront us. Among what we might call these universal values, none is more dear to the Holy See than the promotion of peace. This is the driving force of the Holy See's engagement internationally. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Pope's Secretary of State, summed it up in these words, I quote, "The Holy See, in essence, works on the international stage in order to sustain the idea of a peace that is the fruit of just relations, of respect for international norms, of the protection of fundamental human rights, beginning with those of the least, the most vulnerable." Pope Francis recalled the centrality of peace in the activity of the Holy See during his address to the diplomatic corps in 2016. He says, "On the diplomatic level, the Holy See will never cease to promote efforts to enable the message of peace to be heard to the ends of the earth. The greatest challenge we face is that of overcoming indifference and working together for peace, which remains a good that must constantly be sought." The Holy Father returns to this theme in that address he gave to diplomats just a few weeks ago to mark the beginning of the new year. He recalled the publication of Pope John XXIII's encyclical letter, Pacem in Terris, 60 years ago, in the context of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the ominous threat of nuclear annihilation. Pacem in Terris means, of course, peace on earth. Pope Francis remarked that the text of the encyclical letters continues to be extremely timely, even though the international context has changed greatly. He went on. The path to peace are paths of solidarity, for no one can be saved alone. We live in a world so interconnected that, in the end, the actions of each have consequences for all. We are currently witnessing, in real time, how true is the Pope's observation as we live with the worldwide consequences of the tragedy unfolding in Ukraine. Not only are what Pope Francis calls the martyrs, Ukrainian people, suffering, but the conflict threatens the food safety of many of the poorest nations. It threatens the energy supply of many non-belligerents, and it has caused a huge migrant crisis for neighboring countries. In this context, the Pope tirelessly urges negotiations and peace. In October 2nd last, Pope Francis issued an urgent appeal for ceasefire, asking that serious proposals for peace be heard. In addition, the Pope made this appeal to the wider world, and I quote, "I urge all the protagonists of international life and the political leaders of nations to do everything possible to bring an end to the war, without allowing themselves to be drawn into dangerous escalations, and to promote and support initiatives for dialogue." Commenting on the Pope's appeal, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State, in a speech on December 13th last, laid out the position of the Holy See, not only in relation to the present conflict in Ukraine, but in response to every recourse to violence and war. And I quote, "Let us seek then to take no new path of peace, beginning in Europe, excluding nobody. Let us dedicate energy and resources to promoting dialogue and negotiation. Let us invest more in peace at every level, beginning with our school programs. Let us collaborate with and support those leaders who continue to believe in peace, even when everything seems obscure and appears to be devoured by the demon of war. Let Europe return to being the beacon of a civilization founded on peace, on the rule of law, and on international justice." It sounds almost prosaic to say that but Vatican diplomacy, the Holy See's diplomacy, exists to keep calling the world back to this fundamental truth: dialogue and peace. Dialogue towards peace is the highest meaning of diplomacy. For the Holy See, dialogue is always to be pursued and privileged. It is the royal road to overcoming patterns of conflict and especially to averting war. Pope Francis, in that discourse of January the 9th last, made this clear to the diplomats he addressed when he said, "The task of diplomacy is precisely to resolve conflicts and thus to foster a climate of reciprocal cooperation and trust for the sake of meeting common needs." It can be said that diplomacy is an exercise of humility, since it demands that we sacrifice something of our self-regard in order to build a relationship with others, to understand their thinking and points of view, and thus to oppose the human pride and arrogance that are the cause of every will to wage war. That image of diplomacy as an exercise of humility seems to me something very beautiful and true. The virtue of humility does not, perhaps, jump spontaneously to mind when we conjure up the traditional profile of a diplomat. But today, a strong dose of humility would greatly help our international order. Perhaps that is the real task of the Holy See's diplomacy today, to call the world to a diplomacy of humility for the sake of our common home and of our future generations. So to conclude, my dear friends, I've been able to touch only briefly. You know, I spent 46 years of my life in the Vatican diplomacy, so this is just a few minutes for you. I have been able to touch only briefly on three aspects of the Holy See's diplomatic activity: bilateral relations, multilateral relations, and the promotion of dialogue and peace. They are by no means the only aspects, but merely those that suggest themselves as particularly important in the current context. We have had the opportunity to look at each one, admittedly in a rather cursory manner, but in a certain sense, it can be misleading even to enumerate them as if they were separate matters. They are, of course, all deeply interrelated. What they represent are aspects of the Holy See activity in the world. That activity springs from the universal mission of the Pope, and it is consequently ordered towards communion, collaboration, cooperation for the promotion of the gospel and for the promotion of everything that favors human flourishing. The vision that guides the Holy See global engagement makes it a unique contributor to the international conversation and makes it a ready partner of all who wish to promote peace and who strive for the common good. I am grateful to have had this opportunity to share with you some thoughts on these questions that are of great importance today. I hope this short address has afforded a glimpse of the Holy See's global profile, which is rooted in the mission and activity of the Pope, both as the sovereign subjects, but also and principally as the successor of Peter and the visible head of the Catholic Church. Thank you.
Thank you, Archbishop Pierre. I must say amen to a diplomacy of humility. We are very grateful for those insights that you've offered. And we have, the Archbishop has agreed to take a few questions from the audience. And Archbishop, you can do it from the podium, or we have a mic at your chair if you'd like to sit while you answer questions. It's entirely up to you. Yeah. Okay. We're going to start with Carlos, okay? And you can use the mic right in front, Carlos. Thank you.
All right. Your Excellency, how does the Holy See approach collaboration between and among faith-based and secular actors in the international community?
You mean between, among faith?
Faith-based organizations.
Well, you know, this is the challenge. This is our constant challenge, you know. It's, you know, may I say, you know, it's quite unique in the international order. You know, we have all experienced that. And people are a bit, even people from other faith, they said, how is it that the Vatican has such a network of diplomats, and but you are only a religion, so you have nothing to do, you know. And I remember a few years ago, there were some countries who tried to get rid of the presence of the Vatican, the Holy See representation in the United Nations. But other countries, even secular states, you know, people or states who profess to be secular for whatever reason, you know that story, defended the presence of the Holy See. So I think they have perceived that there is something special. And by the way, you know, we with humility, hopefully, I think it's very important, we pretend with humility to offer something which is very precious for the world. And we are aware, because it's part of our religious experience, I think the best, for me, for us, the best example of humanity is Jesus Christ, because he's the Son of God, And we are followers of Jesus Christ, and, he teaches us, he helps us to be more human. And we are convinced that, the presence of the religious dimension, is so important for the future of the world, for the building of a different world. And this is what, leads us. So this is how we do it, I don't know. But maybe we do it through our presence, through our words, and through our action. Because, behind the diplomats of the Holy See, there is the whole Catholic Church, with all its networks. You are behind it. Networks of instruments of education, like this beautiful university, so many hospitals, and the presence of the church all over the world. And I don't, having been myself in many countries, I cannot imagine the world without the church. And this is what we, the diplomats of the church, are constantly witnessing in front of maybe secular states. And I'm convinced that we are listened to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Next is, for a question, is going to be Jasmine.
Your Excellency, thank you for coming. My question is, as a diplomacy student and as a Catholic, it is my dream to become a papal nuncio. But historically, only ordained people have served in this role. Could this position ever open up to women?
Who knows? Well, why not? Why not? I think it's I think the subject has been already touched by, in some instances, much higher than me, so I can talk freely. But for example, I don't know why. Maybe one day a good lady like you could replace Monsignor Caccia. No, I think everything is possible. But it's part also of the evolution of the church, and also we become aware of some issues. I think it's that's what I can say. Everything is possible. The role of the nuncio is also, as I said in my presentation, it's not just the diplomacy, but we have also a role to play, inside the church. I think it's quite an important role also. And maybe there is some reasons for the presence of an ordained minister and even the bishop or an archbishop, among the other bishops of the country. But this is because also of the dual role we have, we have two hats, two hats in one hat. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is David.
Yes.
Your Excellency, during your service as a diplomat of the Holy See, what differences in Catholic practice and customs have you found in different parts of the world?
Many differences. I think actually, I've been myself in 9 countries, as you know, in nearly 50 years, of life. So I live mainly in South America and in Africa. That has been the main countries I lived. So, in our work, we are first and foremost we are called as envoys. We are sent by the Holy Father to represent him in a different culture. So the first duty of diplomats, like all diplomats, but also diplomats of the Holy See, is the ability to encounter people who are different. That's also the beauty of our life. I've liked that all my life. To discover new culture and to be able to relate to people who are different. So the differences are big. Of course they are. But on the other hand, I have That's my personal experience. I've always felt at home anywhere in the world, you know. And that's also related to the further questions, you know, that, an African is an African in Africa, but he's also a Catholic, and there is something mysterious. An American is an American. I know what I'm talking about. But he's also a Catholic. Many are. And, you know, we find a kind of common ground. And that's the beauty of, you know, and I personally have always enjoyed that, you know. So it shows that, you know, at times we think that the polarization which is, which seems to be the characterization of part of our society today, and some people even say in the church, who knows? But, you know, the polarizations could be avoided if there is what the Pope says, you know, dialogue, and discover the others, and, you know, avoiding to fall back all the time in ideologies, or to ideologize every issue, you know. The danger we have, and I think it is a danger for us in this country, and I speak, you know, to Americans, of course. The danger is at times, you know, to defend values. And it's good to defend values. I've spoken all the values we defend all the time: peace, fraternity, solidarity, and so on. But these values should never become ideas we fight for. You know, these values I think I heard the Pope say that this afternoon, you know, on YouTube, you know, in Kinshasa. He said, you know, be careful. You are not proselyte. You are witness of values. And the best way to convince the world of these values is to be a witness of these values. Because if we transform these good values in ideas, you become a fighter for this idea. And if the other one becomes an enemy because he doesn't believe, so we are fighting idea and it goes nowhere. And this is maybe one of the dangers we have in this society today, and maybe also in our church.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. So Sasha, please.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for your remarks today. My question is, how does the Church's teaching on the individual dignity of the human person inform its interaction with the LGBTQIA+ movement?
Well, difficult question.
That's why I asked it.
There is, you know, I don't have any answer, but, you know, this is precisely what I will not transform the idea of ideologize the debate.
Okay, fair enough, thank you.
But it's not just to escape that, but, you know, to the respect of the human person. Even the idea of respect of the human person should not become an ideology.
Interesting, okay.
I don't know if you understand myself, you know? Because then we will become fighters of ideas.
Good point, very good point. Thank you.
I would like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon for this wonderful occasion. I'd like to, in particular, thank the students who asked questions and served as student ambassadors that helped make this event possible. Of course, a very warm word of thanks to Archbishop Pierre for coming up from Washington, spending time with us. Also for His Eminence and His Excellency for joining us as well. Quite a remarkable moment, as the Cardinal mentioned. So thank you all. And Archbishop, we would like to present you with just a small token of our appreciation for your visit today. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you all very much for attending.